Yeah, um, first of all, I'm happy to be here, to be part of the Stroke of Genius show. Um, MIT is a pretty interesting place. The first few weeks, I remember that's always a culture shock. You know. It was my first real time away from home. I'd been to Singapore for Physics Olympiad, but that was just 2 weeks. So it was my first real time being away from home for an extended period of time. First time in the United States, first time in Massachusetts. Um, there is a bit of a culture shock. People, of course, look fairly different, dressed differently. People speak differently. People behave differently. And so the first few weeks is mainly just trying to understand this new culture that I'm being immersed into, that I'm about to make my home for the next 4 years, how that differs from the culture that I just came from, and how I plan to make my mark in this institution that has supposedly collected a lot of brilliant minds together. That probably sums up my first few weeks, just trying to navigate the culture shock and trying to understand what my next 4 years is going to be and how I can kind of better position myself to be able to succeed in an institution where a lot of brilliant minds have met. So I was there 2007. I think we finished Achimota School in 2006, but I don't know if that's still the practice now in Ghana. But those days there was a year gap before you start college. So I started in 2007. I think I always say I was pretty oblivious to what racism and discrimination was. Um, in Ghana, being black, the dominant race, um, in our institutions, be it elementary school, JSS, high school, we don't spend a lot of time discussing race relations and discussing what discrimination is per se. And so I think for the most part, I'll say I was oblivious to what discrimination was. And so even if there was, I don't think I'd have been able to pinpoint it. Um, After so many years there, I would say there probably was some discrimination. It's just that I, at the time, didn't know what discrimination even was. So, yeah. Yeah. So I I've always liked physics. I've always given more attention to physics than say math, chemistry, or biology. Um, Throughout Achimota, I think I kind of picked up most of the physics prizes. Um, I didn't consider myself the best physics student in Achimota, but at least according to speech and prize given day, I was maybe considered the best physics student at the time. The Olympiad 2006 was the first time that Ghana decided to take part. Um, I think actually African countries started taking part in the Olympiad in 2000, the year 2000. So Nigeria, I believe, had been sending contestants to the Olympiad, but Ghana at the time, there wasn't a lot of interest at the Ministry of Education to accept the invitation for Physics Olympiad. And so I think around 2005, there was a gentleman, Mr. Pia, who used to work in Ghana Education Service, if I remember correctly. He had a relationship with Professor Alote. I think most people know Professor Francis Alote. And so he went to Professor Alote and said, hey, we keep getting this invitation, but the government doesn't want to support spending a little bit of money to send students to the Olympiad. So Professor Alote was, you'll see, he's a physicist, he's interested in that. And so together with Alote and Mr. Pia, they were able to go to the Ministry of Education and convince them that Ghana needed to take part in the Olympiad. And so my understanding is from that point on, they reached out to a number of schools, Achimota, Presec, Van Spim, Wesley Girls, and a few other schools, asking for the schools to provide their best for the students. And so in our case, I think, I don't know who else was invited, but myself, I was invited. So we get to this hall, and there are people like Timothy Kuting. People might know him from Presec 2006 NSMQ team. I think Mike Nelson, who's still my friend to this day. So we're all there, and there wasn't any exam, actually. I think people think there was an exam and whatnot. There wasn't any exam, there wasn't any quiz. It was basically like physics teachers from all these institutions. They sat down and I don't know if they debated, they deliberated, and they were like, okay, these are our 5 best physics students based on our experiences teaching them, their, I guess, performance in exams, their maybe prize and award pickups. And so they decided, okay, these 5 students was myself, Timothy, Mike. There was a guy from Pokwari, who I'm blanking out on his name right now, and then there was a lady, Echa Ado from Wesley Girls. Where basically they aligned on as like the 5 best physics students in Ghana to go represent Ghana. The Olympiad itself in 2006, I think. I mentioned earlier, culture shock at MIT. There was a bit of shock at the Olympiad as well. You get there and you start interacting with people who, for their entire lives, have only been studying physics and math. Right? Like, we were studying like 8 or so subjects, and you get then people have been studying physics and math for the past, I don't know, 6, 7 years. Only that. And there was a huge knowledge gap in what they knew, both in theoretical physics and experimental physics, and what we knew, including even the Nigerians who had been there since 2000. Yeah. So anyways, yeah, the Olympiad is it's 2 5-hour exams. There's a theory, 5 hours. There's an experimental physics, it's 5 hours. Yeah, I can tell you, the theory was, I said, 20 to 25% okay. The experimental part was gnarly. Like, it was very difficult. Some of the instruments I'd never even seen before. But it was a great experience to interact with physicists from all over the world. There's a guy, Pangus Ho, who was on my floor at MIT. He won the overall best student at the Physics Olympiad. I met him in Singapore. We had great conversations there. And he mentioned to me at the time that he had done early application to MIT. And I was like, oh, MIT, okay. So anyways, yeah, I think I've probably spent a lot of time on this question, but so I'm not sure. I haven't followed closely like the education system in Ghana since I left. I'm not sure what has changed. So maybe a lot has changed. But at the time, going through the Olympiad, I felt that we were behind, both in theory and especially experimental physics. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the tools that I was supposed to work with during the Olympiad I'd never seen before. And so experimentally we were behind, but also in theory we were a bit behind in the concepts that we were being taught in high school. I think one of the reasons that I could pinpoint to is we had all these other classes that we had to take, social studies, English, things like that we had to take, versus some of the countries that we met were very narrow focused, and so they were able to go deeper and deeper into some of these theories than we were able to do at that time. I'm hoping it's improved now, but to your question, I think at the time I did feel like there was a huge gap between the way we were being taught here and the way some other countries were teaching their students. Okay. So I had applied to KNUST for medicine. Weirdly enough, as I said earlier, I like physics. I've always studied physics, um, but I had always also wanted to be a doctor. So, um, not more human biology focused. The main reason for that, I got a younger sister who had quite a number of medical issues when she was born. And so at the time I felt, okay, I need to be a doctor to help her and fix some of the issues that she was having. And so even though I was very good at physics, I really love physics, my career choice at the time was to be a doctor. So I did apply to KNUST, I applied to medicine. But in parallel, I did application to MIT and Caltech as well for engineering. So I did consider doing medicine. So the good thing about MIT, and I think they still do that till date, is admissions and financial aid are separate. So financial aid is mostly need blind, um, and so it's not merit based. So I think maybe people sometimes think that you have to get into MIT, get really high scores, and then you get scholarship. Um, you can get into MIT, and the financial aid part is completely separate. And so what they do is once you get in, they look at your family's financial situation, and they award the scholarship based on your family's financial situation and if they can pay the fees or not. So I did get full scholarship. The full scholarship did include, of course, tuition, uh, room and board. There was a little bit of money for food and for books. Um, and for the most part, that could cover all my expenses, and my family didn't have to pay anything or send me any money for all 4 years. I did, however, pick up jobs while I was going through undergrad. MIT has library jobs. There are dormitory front desk jobs where you can the dormitory keeps say, like sports equipment and things like that students can come, they can trade in their ID and pick up the equipment and come pick it up, or return it, and it paid pretty well, and it wasn't tasking. You can be there, you can be doing your homework, and if you're working in the library, you can be reading the library books. So for me, it was like I'm getting paid to like study and do my homework. That's great. There are actually even better jobs, like undergraduate research opportunities programs, like Europe they used to call it then, where you can reach out to a professor and say, hey, you're doing this research, I'm really interested in it, I can help out with this particular research. The professor would assign you some tasks, and you could do that either for credit or you could do it for pay. So I did do some of the Europes as well. Yeah, I remember quite a number of them. Obviously, a huge number of them were in the science and math, the greater science and math quiz team. So Daniel Patrick Clark, I remember him pretty well. Kofiani Nakwa, Carlos Echampong, Donald uh, Note, I think Note or Nate, one of them. James Edo, Rex Bonsu, uh, Ewena Mabolosu, Natasha Tay, um, quite a number of people. Pretty smart group of guys and girls who really spurred me on and challenged me to be the best that I could be. I think both Blood and Daniel Clark inspired me to work hard. Um, Daniel Clark was kind of an interesting guy in that you never see him studying, um, but then he would do well in the exams and speech and prize giving day and whatnot. Um, and so it was always like, what is he up to? Like, this guy's never studying, but he's always doing well. And so I tried to pick up elements of some of that and try to hide when I studied. Now I could be like him. Um, Blood, on the other hand, let's see. Blood was more. He was more like. He was more vocal. Um, and when blood is around, blood is around. And that inspired me in a different way. Um, Especially when you start thinking about a science and math quiz, sometimes you want to show your confidence, and I think blood gave me that. In that he was always kind of confident in his dealings, confident in what he knows, and confident in displaying his ability. I don't know what I don't know what made them decide to include me, um, but um, I think um, maybe the physics. I'm not sure exactly why they included me, but outside of maybe a little bit outside of that decision making process, I, I think I I used to watch the quiz. I think like from 2003. Actually, no, even before that, from 2000 when I was in junior high school. On Saturdays, 12 o'clock, Dr. Adomako, and those days used to weekly. It wasn't like now where it's like real time and everybody is into it. Those times you get to see it once a week, and so I used to watch it with my dad. And I was in junior high, and I was like he actually said, you are going to be part of this competition. I was like, yeah, I want to be part of this competition. um, and so again, outside of the decision making and why the school selected me or not, um, I was always driven to be part of the competition. A lot of the stuff I did in junior high school, going into Achimota School from the very first year, was geared towards being part of the competition and representing the school, and making my name in the competition. I watched guys like Bubune, guys like Paul Azure, um, um, I'm blank on a few other names, but um, I watched them, and I was very inspired. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be on the stage. I wanted to show the world that I I knew a few things. Um, and so maybe my knowledge of physics, maybe my desire and passion for the competition, and desire to want to be part of the team is what led the school to select me. Maybe. Uh, I I've always been like top three, um, as far as I can remember. Um, I My mom used to keep a report card. I don't know if it's still there, but in I think it was like grade four, the first term of grade four. I remember on the bottom the teacher had written mathematically and scientifically inclined, and my mom like framed it. It was on the wall in the house, and essentially I couldn't deviate from that. You had to be mathematically and scientifically inclined the rest of the way. Um, yeah, I wouldn't term it as like brilliant, um, but I think I was always driven to learn math and science. I was always driven to know a lot, um, and so if that is defined as brilliant, then maybe, yeah. Oof. Hardest academic moment in Achimota. I always felt I always felt pretty good, walking up the stage to pick up a prize, even from my university primary days. So maybe I think maybe that whole experience, be it university primary, be it Achimota, just walking through a crowd of people, go up the stage, pick up your prize. I think that always felt really good. Um, so that probably would be my proudest moment. Um, I would have wanted uh, NSMQ and a title belt, and I think that would have been on the top of the list, but I never got that. So um, I only have my prizes to hold on to. So my first job was with an oil and gas company called Schlumberger. Um, the way I got the job, well, I'd have to let me go back a second. So I interned with them in my junior year. MIT has career fairs, and so there were all kinds of companies. At the time, oil and gas, this is 2008, 2009, oil and gas companies were like where people wanted to be. I think Exxon was the company with the highest market capitalization in the world at the time, and maybe the top five was oil and gas companies like Exxon, Chevron, BP. Everyone wanted to work in these companies. I remember even like in MIT, um, most people were shooting for oil and gas jobs. Those were the top companies. There was no, Google. These companies were there. Google, Apple, and whatnot. They were there, but they were not big. Um, and so I looked into oil and gas companies, and there were a couple of restrictions. The first one was at the time, a lot of the oil and gas companies, especially for undergrads, they only took US citizens and permanent residents. And so if you were an international student like me, unless you had a PhD, they were not willing to give you even an internship. But on the flip side, the oil field companies, so oil field companies are companies that build the tools that the oil and gas companies use for extracting oil and gas from various wells. So the oil field companies, however, they hired, whether you're international or American citizen or wherever you're from, they hired undergrads. And so they were the next best thing. If you couldn't do oil and gas company, oil field services company. So I applied to a few of them: Schlumberger, Baker Hughes, Halliburton. Those were the top three at the time. And I think a combination of my GPA and my application, I got selected for internship interviews with all three companies. So I interviewed with them, and I liked Schlumberger better because they were more international at the time. Halliburton and Baker Hughes were more based in the US. Schlumberger had offices in France. They had offices in Malaysia. They even had offices in Ghana. So when I got an internship, and they asked me, "Oh, where do you want to work?" I was like, "Oh, yeah, France sounds like a nice place. I want to be in Paris." So I was kind of drawn to Schlumberger, and so through that internship, I kind of went back. Once I was done with undergrad, I went back to Schlumberger. I was working as a design engineer in a safety valve group. Um, uh, people might know 2010. There was a BP incident in the Gulf of Mexico, Macondo incident, it's popularly called, where something called a blowout preventer. It's a safety valve on top of a well that, if you have a pressure kick from the well, it shuts in and prevents explosions and things like that. Like hand waving the descriptions, but on a very top level, that's what it is. Um, Schlumberger was working on a safety valve that went inside the blowout preventer, so it's kind of a redundancy. So my group, I started in 2013. My group was responsible, post the BP incident, we were responsible for working on this redundant system that had a higher response time than the blowout preventer, and would initially shut in the well and prevent explosion before the blowout preventer had to kick in. I think you know helping work on that first generation of systems. Those systems are all over the world now. We have some of them. I mean, I've since left Schlumberger, but we have some of them in the Gulf of Mexico. We have some of them in Angola. Some of them in the North Sea, in Qatar, Saudi. I think we probably even have some in Ghana. We definitely have some in Nigeria. We probably have some in some of the offshore wells in Ghana as well. Yeah, so I do a lot of reevaluations every year. I do a mini reevaluation, and then every 3 or so years I do a major reevaluation. So I did my first reevaluation. I started Schlumberger, as I said, 2013. I did my first reevaluation in 2016, essentially evaluating my career trajectory, my growth, and my learning, but also where the industry is going. So in 2016, when I did that, I felt that with the way U.S. shale, with the technology advancements in that sector of shale was going to be cheap, and if shale becomes cheap and you flood the oil market with a lot of shale oil or shale gas, prices were going to tank. And if prices tanked, the industry was going to be in a free fall. So that was my thinking in 2016. But I also wanted to wait a little bit to see if it actually materialized. I tend to build models and kind of wait and check if the models come to pass, or at least you get some inclination that, okay, this model is on the right track. And until 2016, I looked at that, I felt, okay, the industry is probably about to go in a free fall, and so I should probably start looking for an exit. But I didn't then. I waited for a year to 2017, and lo and behold, shale actually flooded the oil market. The industry started to tank. Companies started cutting employees, and so fortunately, Subsea, like the group that I was in, which is the safety valves group, we have like a year or two lag in that we had a lot of orders going all the way into 2020. So we're not under any immediate job cuts. But once I got the first sign of job cuts, I figured my model seems like it's on the right track. It's time to leave this industry and move to a more stable industry. And so I looked around. I've always had a small part of me has always liked aerospace. And so I looked into aerospace, I looked into automotive, I looked into consumer electronics, and of all the industry that I looked into, consumer electronics was the one that I felt was the way of the future for the next 10 or so years. And so of all the companies in that space, I felt Apple was the most stable, the one that was poised to lead. They were already leading anyways, so it was easy to notice that they were poised to continue to lead in the next 10 or so years. So I applied to Apple. Chemistry. Chemistry because if you've noticed, I've mentioned physics, I've mentioned bio, I've mentioned math, but I haven't mentioned chemistry, and I didn't like chemistry that much. I just like naturally did not like chemistry that much, and so I never put in as much effort as I should have, and that's probably not a good thing. But yeah, I always felt like it would be a Herculean effort to try to pick a prize in chemistry. I once won the gold king of inter-house soccer competition at Achimota.
With how many goals?
2 goals. Yeah, so the thing with time, I have a tendency to quickly identify the things that I don't like, and I cut them out. And so, back in Achimota, I realized I don't really like cleaning the dorm, and so, and I'm not advising that people do this. I think, like within the I don't know if like legality is the right word, but within the laws of wherever you are, if you can quickly identify things that are sucking up your time, but you don't have interest in, or you don't foresee a future in that particular thing that you are doing, quickly cut it out. And if it's within what is allowed, I'll say like go for it. Don't. I think like we tend to spend a lot of time dilly dallying with decisions and like, oh, should I cut this out? Should I cut this press? Sometimes it's even a friend, right, that is sucking up a lot of the time, and you dilly dally with a decision. Should I cut the present out? Oh no, they're gonna feel bad and things like that. But I think like quickly identifying, hey, this is not very helpful to me. It's sucking up my time. I need the time to do something else. It's within the laws of wherever I am. Just cut it out and use the time for something that you feel there is a future for. I was born in Accra, and well, I was born in Kolebu. Um, we grew up in Achimota, um, New Achimota, so fairly close to Achimota School, 10, 15 minutes, give or take. Um, my both parents were teachers. My mom is retired now. My dad passed some years ago, maybe 18 years ago. Huh. Um, but as you can imagine, teachers. So it was like you gotta study. We had a library at home. My dad was always grading, so when he's grading, then I pick up a book and I study. Or sometimes I like over his shoulder, seeing like why he's giving someone incorrect, and asking him questions like, why is this incorrect? Why is this correct? And just trying to pick up as much as I could. Um, I think, as you can imagine, like parents were pretty pushy in terms of studying and um, getting good grades and things like that. And so anything related to academics, they would provide. Like if you wanted extra classes, I don't know how exactly they were doing it because you can imagine like teachers are not paid that well. I don't know how they were doing it, but it was like if I needed extra classes, they would provide. If I like needed a new book or a toy that enabled, I remember the VTech um, that I spent a lot of time on. But anything that was academic related, they would provide. It's always tough to get them to provide things non-academic related. But no, no, definitely not. I think probably like low to middle income. Um, I think you know both parents were working government jobs, and so they had a salary. And in Ghana, for the most part, salaries sometimes they're not paid on time, but for the most part, if you're salaried, you do know that it's coming. um, and so, from that stability standpoint, we had that, but we didn't have a lot. And so, I can imagine my parents had to kind of balance things. In terms of what they could give us and what they couldn't. Like I was saying earlier, I remember I wanted at the time, the year 2000, PS1, Sega Dreamcast, Sega Mega Drive. A lot of my friends had it, and I wanted one really badly. And my dad was like, "Nope, you are not getting one." Um, and so yeah, there's certain things that like I had to sacrifice that my parents couldn't afford and get that for me. But education related stuff, I think they always try to. It's a, that's a tough question. Um, I think that a couple of things come to mind. The first one is probably interest, right? So interest slash passion. I think if you are passionate that you want to better yourself, you want to better your situation, um, then even if you don't have the the immediate resources, so extra tuition, extra like classes and whatnot, you're not able to afford that. Um, there are a lot of free resources that if you have the passion and the drive, you can actually tap into. Um, there is, I'm not sure people know about Khan Academy, but Salman Khan, I forget which year he graduated from MIT, but he started these tutorials on YouTube where he goes to a lot of concepts in high school math, high school physics, and a few other subjects. And it's all available for free on YouTube, right? Libraries, um, like old textbooks. that may be available in your local library or in your school. I think if there's the passion, if there's the drive that I really want to get out of this situation, regardless of how much you know now, and you have that drive that I want to get out of this situation, I think there are a lot of free resources available that you can pick up. Um, and if you are still kind of struggling understanding the concepts as you listen to a YouTube video or something like that, um, there are, I would say there are quite a number of, in my experience, there are quite a number of people that are always willing to teach for free. Um, Not just myself, but a few other people that I know um, are always like willing to teach for free. So if you have that drive, um, if you can identify someone who has reached a certain height that you think is a height that you want to achieve, drop them a message, and maybe they respond, and maybe they are happy to mentor you for free. You have to be able to find ways, because you don't have the resources. You have to be able to find free ways to access the information you need, and you have to be driven to do that. I mentioned two things. The second thing is discipline. So you have to have the drive and the passion to find free stuff and to utilize the free stuff, and you have to have the discipline to stick to it, because it's always not going to be a straight path. You'd encounter stumbling blocks. You might study, write an exam and fail, and you'd have to have the discipline to stick with the dream that you have. That probably would be my advice. Yeah, so I said the family was fairly stable. Uh, Dad and mom had a salaried job, so it was fairly stable. Um, I mentioned at some point that my mom is retired, but my dad died. So, 2005 thereabout, dad died, which means that all of a sudden we are relying on a single income. Um, and my mom at the time, actually, I have a cousin who's always lived with us uh, ever since she was like 3. So essentially, it's like 3 kids. It's me, my cousin, and my younger sister being basically supported on my mom's teaching single income salary. And so things were stable till dad died, and then it became very rocky. Um, I think the fortunate part um, was that the death happened right, so end of 2005, so right before I finished high school. And so I was 6 months in. Things were rough, but 6 months in, I was done with high school, and so mom didn't have to worry about my school fees. I found a job as a teaching assistant. I went to University Primary, so I found a job as a teaching assistant at University Primary in that gap year while waiting to go to college. And so I was for the most part able to support myself, and also maybe give mom a little bit. That way she could use to support my cousin and my sister. And then basically got into MIT. It was fully funded, so again, she didn't have to worry about me. I could kind of take care of myself. And then once at MIT, I think I mentioned earlier, I picked up some jobs. And so between the stipend MIT was giving me that could essentially cover my books and food and whatnot, and so all the money I was getting while I worked in school, I could then kind of give that to my mom, and she could use that for my sister and my cousin. So I think, yeah, to your question, there was a little dip in stability, but then it was okay stable, even through my MIT years. So I got a job at Schlumberger, and then I was then able to even help some more. It's it's weird. I think subconsciously, I don't think I ever actually sat down and went like, this is the family situation, and I need to get the family out, and so I'm gonna like study hard and work hard. So I never had that sit down moment. But I think subconsciously, that was probably what I was doing. Um, but yeah, I think it wasn't a conscious thing. It wasn't that I was going to go for these dreams. I'm going to study. I'm going to do that because I want to get my family out. It never actually crossed my mind in that sense. But I think subconsciously I was probably working towards that. I think my advice is fairly simple, and it's that you you shouldn't give up, mainly because even if you get, in one instance, if you give up, you get a zero, right? Give or take. If you don't give up, you increase the probability of getting 100. Maybe you get 100, maybe you don't, but you increase the probability of not getting zero. And that I always say you collect points. I watch a lot of basketball. I cannot play basketball. I don't know, so I watch a lot of basketball. And in high intensity basketball games like playoff games, you collect points. What that means is like there are periods in the game where nothing is going your way. You can't get yourself out of a 20-point deficit that you're in, and you could just throw in the towel and just give up on the game. But if you collect points, if you just do some simple things and just get 2 points here, 3 points there, 2 points there, 3 points here, by the fourth quarter of the basketball game, before you realize, those points have added up, and now you're down just 5 points, right? And so I think that same analogy, you can make that with a student who's given up because of a particular situation. You just collect points because you never know what those points will do for you. It could bump up your GPA by a few points, but maybe that few points is what gets you over a cutoff point for some job application or for some graduate school application, for whatever. That few extra points you collected is what got you past the minimum line and got you accepted. Right? And so, yeah, my advice would be, it's never too late. Just collect as many points as you possibly can, because you never know when those points will be useful. So I have to be a little bit careful in the way I answer this. A lot of the stuff at Apple, you have to be careful in the way you describe them. And so, on a very top level, I am again product design. I mentioned earlier, Schlumberger, I was mechanical engineering, product design. I work in the touch group, and so touch sensors on your MacBook, touch sensors on your phone, touch sensors on your iPad. I'm in a functional group, and that's basically the product that we deliver. On a daily basis, my job to kind of summarize is form, fit, and function, right? So how does this touch sensor, how is it going to look? What is the thickness going to be? How is it going to fit into the system it's going into? So if it's going into a phone, for example, how is it going to fit in the phone? How does it have to look to fit in the phone? And then function. What user experience are we trying to get to? And so my main job is essentially assuring form, fit, function. I obviously, as a mechanical engineer, as a product designer, you work with a lot of manufacturing teams. Once you've designed it on your computer screens and you've checked the form, the fit, and the function, you have to actually make it. So I work with a lot of manufacturing teams, a lot of factories to make it. We make prototypes, we make actual things. And then I work with the system integration teams to integrate it into a full product. And sometimes actually I work with the user experience teams to make sure we are bringing forth the user experience we conceived when the product first started. So Tim Cook he's really good, and that's obvious, but also an understatement. He is a lot different from Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs and people who might know Johnny Ive, they were kind of artists. They were industrial design gurus. So they could conceive, okay, a product should look this way, should feel this way to generate excitement. Um, Tim obviously has learned some of these things from them, but his domain is really operations, right? So for him, it's now that you have all these products that look and feel a certain way that have generated excitement, how do we become operationally efficient? Right? How can we cut down cost while still delivering even better quality? Um, and the cutting down cost actually benefits in two ways. One way, of course, is profit margins for Apple. If your cost price is low and you keep a certain sales price, of course, margins are obviously better. But also, actually, for the consumers, it allows you to drop the sales price if you want to keep the same profit margin. Um, so, in the past, you may have realized Apple was mainly like high end, targeting high end people. But then in recent years, there's a lot of entry Apple products. And that's because of Tim Cook, it's because of the operational efficiency while still delivering the same quality. It allows you to then actually have products at different price points, including lower price points. That way you can get like new consumers to kind of enter the fray. It's it's a That's a tough question. I've met people that are like inherently brilliant. Like my roommate at MIT was inherently brilliant. Um, this guy comes, we go to lectures, we sit in the same lecture hall. He sits and he crosses his leg, he doesn't take any notes. He just listens. He doesn't even ask any questions in the lecture. Um, we get problem sets. We go back, we try to solve them, and he has like great intuition about the problem sets that like sometimes the professors don't even have that intuition into their own problem sets. Um, I always make sports analogies. You can imagine there are people who are like supremely talented in soccer or basketball or whatnot. The game just comes naturally to them. They know when to cut, when to stop, when to dribble, when to pass, when to shoot. Um, and so I think, kind of going back to the academic excellence and your question, um, there are people who are naturally gifted, um, but it doesn't also mean that if you're not naturally gifted, you can't get to a certain level, right? Same with the sports. You can learn these things, right? You can learn from them. You can learn from books. You can learn from mentors. You can learn from other places to get to a decent level. Maybe not to the person who is like naturally and intuitively like gifted, but you can get to a decent level to be able to contribute to the same level as some of the naturally gifted people contribute. I think it's a long-winded way to answer your question, but yeah, I think like um, people can learn and get to be productive members of society, get to the same level or close enough level of academic excellence as some of the naturally gifted people. But I would be mistaken to say that there aren't naturally gifted people. There are people who just naturally know a particular domain. It may be sports, it may be academics, physics, chemistry, whatnot, art, whatever. But there are people who just naturally know the terrain.